Our final closure fastener is called a hook and eye, and it is used when we have two finished edges of a garment that need to butt up against each other. They just need to meet. This is typically seen at the back of a woman's gown, above a zipper. You'll find a hook and eye. So you have the hook portion and the eye portion. Now I will typically sew on the eye, the eye portion first. Sometimes this is called a hook and loop closure. Now I have been sewing my samples so that the hardware lives on the side that is not labeled. So I'm going to flip this over, all right? You know it's the hook and eye. Okay, so the eye is going to go on what would be your left side of the garment, and you want to place it on the fold of your sample so that the edge of the loop is just even with the folded edge of your fabric. Okay, so pinch that in place, and just like we've been doing, take little stitches to anchor, attach around the holes that are provided for you. Now on the hook and eye, your stitches can be seen from the outside on both pieces of hardware. Since they butt up against each other, there's no overlap to hide either side. So I'm just moving my needle around this little loop that's provided, and once I have pretty well attached that side, I simply will move my needle over, jump over here, and attach this loop. Now make sure it's still right at the edge of your fabric, the folded edge, not the cut edge. Remember that hardware is always sewn on at least 2 layers of fabric. Hardware, fasteners, closures, those are all sort of interchangeable terms. Okay. One more stitch and then I'll tie off on this part. Hopefully I'm showing that. Okay, take my anchor stitch. You know the drill by now. Anchor stitch, and then pass it through a loop of thread, pull tight, and trim off. Okay, so now I can use the placement of my eye or loop, match up my 2-piece samples, both of which have a fold here. Okay, and then I want to place my hook so that it is just opposite the eye and just sitting inside that edge as well. So I've got my marks there. Okay. Get my needle in my hand, pick up my sample, and place my hardware on so that I can see my marks. Okay, you want to make sure that the edge of the hook is not extending past the fold. In fact, it should be just inside the fold, just a smidgen. How's that for a proper term? All right, so while you're pinching that together, take your first stitch around this loop, and now continue stitching around and spacing your stitches out so that they travel around this little loop, and then we're going to move over to the other. Okay. Making sure that your stitches are going through both layers of fabric there. All right, now with the hook portion, we have one other little bit to do. It's going to be hard for me to show it to you on the camera. I'll do the best I can. But if I leave it at this, then this hook is going to be likely to lift up off of the fabric. Can you see how I'm pushing that up there? So what I need to do is anchor the actual hook to the fabric. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to put my needle in and slip it through the layers. Remember, I don't want this big stitch that I'm just about to take to show on the outside. So always check, okay, my needle's not showing, so that's good. And I'm going to bring my needle out up near where the hook actually, the hook portion of the hardware sits on the fabric. So my thread is coming out right near the hook. All I need to do is pass my thread under the hook so that now I've got a thread going across, there we go, across the bottom portion of the hook, but underneath the actual curved part of the hook. So I'm just going to take a stitch or two right through there to anchor that hook down. So now that my thread's up here, I simply pull it down under the hook and take another stitch right there. I'm going underneath the hook through my fabric, pulling that up. All right, and then I'll bring my thread back here. You can see I have a tiny little stitch at the edge there. And now I will tie off. Anchor stitch. And final tie off stitch. We'll go through the loop, nice and tight, and snip. All right, now let's test this thing out, okay? So hopefully, if I've attached it correctly, when I fasten this together from the outside, my two edges of fabric will meet, which they in fact do. And even if I were to put a little bit of stress, as if it were at a stress point on a garment, I shouldn't see too much silver hardware peeking out through there if I've done a good job, okay? So when it's relaxed, those two edges touch, and when it's under stress, they separate a little bit, but not much, all right? So that is the hook and eye.